dear Miles, please be safe in France. I will pray God's protection for you every moment we are parted. Perhaps the time was not right, but I still wish we could have been married before you left home. My time will not be spent in despair, you can rest assured. Helping Mother will keep me occupied, and there is my other work besides. Even so, you will be ever on my mind. Who knows what is at work in this world? Distant powers interrupting our simple little lives. Yet, I know that Christ has regarded my helpless estate. And you, Miles, will never be out of God's sight either. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in Him will I trust. Know that I love you, and when you return, I will be ready. I am as always yours, Jean.
On September the 1st, 1939, the forces of the Nazi regime in Germany, ordered by Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. A few days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. There was then a pause, which some have called the Siegeskrieg, following the attack on Poland, which was called the Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War. There were no major land offensives during these months, while around 200,000 British soldiers were sent to support the French army of roughly 6 million.
France was prepared for Germany to attack. Great defenses had been prepared in depth to defend Paris and to defend France.
A series of fortifications called the Maginot Line had been built along the border of France and Germany. An attack from the Ardennes forest region was thought unlikely, so any invasion of France was expected to be directed through Belgium. This is where Britain stationed the bulk of their forces, ready to help the Belgian army if the Germans invaded.
But Hitler and his generals came up with a different plan, one that would surprise the Allies. In fact, when it was proposed initially, the German generals said that it would not work. And that was to take the German armored assault and push them through the Ardennes forest.
Which the French generals had declared in the 1920s and 30s that it was completely impassable. Now the Maginot Line stopped at the city of Sedan, actually just south of it, because Sedan was masked by the Ardennes and the Luxembourg and Belgian borders.
Now 4 years later, there's going to be a great battle in the Ardennes. It's going to be known as the Battle of the Bulge. But before that occurred, the Germans used this heavily forested area to conceal their attack on France. And so several 100,000 German troops struck France from a position that the French never would have guessed.
In addition to attacking Belgium and Holland, the Germans attacked France with a surprising force out of the Ardennes and quickly advanced deep into France. The British forces, as a result, were in danger of being cut off.
The speed by which the Germans assaulted through France resulted in the French forces falling back, being divided, losing heavy casualties. The BEF, the British Expeditionary Forces, alongside the French, falling back toward the coast.
These are today's main events. The BEF evacuation from France has ended. Prime Minister Churchill gave a statement at the House of Commons. He said that a week ago, quote, I feared it would be my hard lot to announce the greatest military disaster in our long history. The Prime Minister also spoke of our present circumstances during his statement today, saying, "We must expect another blow to be struck almost immediately at us or at France. We are told, sir, that Herr Hitler has a plan for invading the British Isles. We hope to give the last part of Mr. Churchill's statement later in..."
The attack came on the 10th of May 1940, just as Winston Churchill became Prime Minister in Britain. The Allied armies fought hard, but in a week's time found themselves increasingly cut off and overwhelmed.
Okay, May 10th, what the Germans did, they launched paratroopers into Holland. They launched a glider attack onto the Belgian fort of Eben-Anael, and then they launched 2 panzer divisions plus a few infantry divisions to go through Belgium and Holland. The Allies at this time sent their forces on the Dial plan forward from their prepared defensive positions into Belgium to shorten their defensive line and also to link up not only with the Belgian army but the Dutch army further to the north. And they were going to meet on the Dial Canal, which is where the plan actually got its name, the Dial Plan. So basically, the British and the Belgians were doing a punch up on top, while the Germans were doing a body blow coming up and under, and it was going to be a huge undercut. Nobody saw it coming.
The German forces had executed a strategy of surprise on all fronts. Within days, their armour had advanced well into France, south of Belgium. Churchill became worried about apparent defeatism among the French leadership and made several trips to France, while at the same time the Belgian army was losing ground in the north. It was in these circumstances the British High Command began discussing a possible evacuation of the British Expeditionary Forces. The risks of evacuation were very high and any amount of success doubtful.
The German assault across France was so swift and so confusing that the French High Command did not even know where many of their troops were, much less where the Germans were. The liaison between the French and the British broke down. The British troops, the BEF, led by Lord Gort, did not know the extent of the German assault. Suddenly the Germans turned up along the coastal roads and started capturing the coastal cities, as well as turning another army toward Paris. The Germans themselves, in fact, suffered some confusion, for they went so swiftly they outran their own front lines.
Every German tank had a radio, where the French High Command didn't even have radios. They didn't even have a field phone into the French High Command. So they were fighting a very set-piece battle, where the Germans were fighting a very fluid battle, and they had trained for this.
As the French and the British fell back towards the Channel ports themselves, it was discovered that the Germans had put them in a position where they would no longer be able to defend themselves. And the BEF in particular, General Gort and his advisors, determined that they were going to withdraw British forces to the beaches of Dunkirk in Belgium.
May 15th, they're pulling back. May 16th, they're pulling back. By May 17th, all of a sudden it becomes a general retreat.
They began issuing plans in England for the defense of their shores. If the BEF was pushed into the ocean and destroyed, then the Germans would be landing on the beaches and parachuting into England. And so defenses began to be prepared for an invasion of England, should the BEF be completely lost.
I thought, and some good judges agreed with me, that perhaps 20,000 or 30,000 men might be re-embarked. But it certainly seemed that the whole of the French First Army and the whole of the British Expeditionary Force north of the Amiens-Abbeville gap would be broken up in the open field, or else would have to capitulate for lack of food and ammunition. These were the hard and heavy tidings for which I called upon the House and the nation to prepare themselves a week ago.
They did not know how a rescue operation would work. They certainly did not have enough ships to do the job. And if the Navy would get into the English Channel to try and rescue the Army, it's entirely possible that the German Air Force could destroy the Royal Navy. So all of the ifs had to be considered. And in the end, Admiral Ramsay called upon the Royal Navy to begin the evacuation. And of course, the RAF, the Royal Air Force, was going to have to be involved.
Initially, when they envisioned the operation, they thought if they were lucky, they were going to rescue about 40,000 troops. They thought, well, they're just going to run some ships in to the harbor and load up these destroyers and fast-moving transport ships and then move them back out.
Partial evacuation had started on the 19th of May with non-combat and wounded individuals. On the 20th, all merchant ships at Dunkirk were ordered to leave due to German bombing. It was clear that these evacuation efforts would not be sufficient. 2 days were not enough, and on the 26th of May 1940, the Admiralty signal went out. Operation Dynamo is to commence. General Adam was reassigned to Dunkirk to organise the defence and evacuation. Shortly after arriving, amid German air raids, he sent a signal reading, "Complete fighter protection now essential if serious disaster is to be avoided." There were some advantages to the area of Dunkirk, which at that time was the largest harbour on the Channel. It had a number of piers and 2 moles, which are earthworks designed to protect the harbour. Much of the harbour, however, was soon either inaccessible or destroyed by the bombing. When embarkation from the beaches proved slow, the east mole was used for loading men directly onto destroyers. It was from that location, under constant attack, that the majority of troops were able to escape.
Now, the vast majority of troops were embarcated from the mole, which was actually a breakwater. It's a French term, the mole, because the harbor itself was blocked. The Luftwaffe came in the early part of the evacuation, sunk a few ships, and it pretty much blocked the harbor.
Sand beaches extended almost 20 miles north from Dunkirk. Many of the soldiers had to wade out into the water to meet small craft which ferried men out to the larger ships. Wading and rowing became a time-consuming process against the bombs and waves. Eventually, trucks were driven out onto the beach during low tide to provide makeshift piers. The British and French established a perimeter around Dunkirk, which happened to be a good defensive position, surrounded by marshes and canals. The soldiers, still fighting hard outside the Dunkirk perimeter, were carefully withdrawn for evacuation.
The Luftwaffe also bombed a lot of the field storage sites for oil, that kind of thing, which caused this very black, thick oil plume, which essentially blanketed quite a lot of the Dunkirk harbor and, more importantly, the mole itself, which thankfully the wind is drifting and taking this cloud, this very thick black cloud, over the mole and over some of the beaches of Dunkirk. So the Luftwaffe, as they're flying over Dunkirk, they can't see what's going on in the mole, thus they can't attack it.
Looking back, we can see many interesting components that enabled this massive operation to succeed. One of the more well-known events was the German High Command slowing their advance between the 23rd and 27th of May. The first 2 days of evacuation saw very few attacks from the German Air Force. Low cloud cover reduced enemy air activity, and the German tanks, which were now closing in on the British position, were ordered to halt.
One of the reasons that they stopped was they came to the marshland. The low land around northern France and Belgium in that particular location was very marshy, and the tanks couldn't get through it in several sectors of the line. Add to that the fact that The BEF and the French army are fighting to the death. They're holding the line and counterattacking. And so the Germans stop for a breath. They've been racing across France. They're exhausted. They need to be resupplied. The British and the French soldiers are pinned. There's nowhere for them to go. They can be eliminated at leisure.
The Luftwaffe doesn't have the clear skies it had further back in mainland France when they were attacking willy-nilly. Now they're having to deal with weather coming off of the Channel, which is notoriously unpredictable. And luckily for the BEF and the French at the time, a lot of the weather turned against the Luftwaffe.
Many people, even around the world, were in constant prayer for the British Army during those months. And as Operation Dynamo was getting underway on the 26th of May, the King of England declared a national day of prayer for their soldiers fighting in France. It was an implied acknowledgement that the British Empire could no longer rely solely upon their own power.
Psalm 20, verse 7. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God.
By the third day, the German Air Force was back in action. They were strafing the beaches. They were dive bombing, and the dive bombing was designed to terrorize the people on the ground because they put a siren on the Stuka dive bombers. So as they came straight down, there was this wailing sound, and then the bomb straight into piles of men who were hiding, trying to dig holes in the beach, hiding behind little hills, shooting back at the German Air Force. For 7 or 8 days, the German armor shelled the beaches, the Air Force bombed and strafed, and they were taken on by the RAF. Several squadrons of British bombers came and bombed the German positions, and the fighter planes took on the German bombers and the German fighters. So there's a big air battle over Dunkirk and inland a little ways. 77 fighter planes are lost, Spitfires and Hurricanes are shot down, and about 80 pilots are lost, and over 100 British bombers were shot down. But while they didn't destroy the German Air Force or beat them off, they at least made it more difficult for them to destroy the army on the ground. So the RAF gave a very good account of themselves.
The enemy attacked us on all sides with great strength and fierceness. And their main power, the power of their far more numerous air force, was thrown into the battle or else concentrated upon Dunkirk and the beaches. They sowed magnetic mines in the channels and seas. They sent repeated waves of hostile aircraft, sometimes more than 100 strong in one formation, to cast their bombs upon the single pier that remained, and upon the sand dunes, on which the troops had their only shelter.
Dearest Jean, it is the 11th of May, and I must finish this letter as the Germans have attacked Belgium. The war has really started for us now, and I don't have much time. Our lives are fleeting, like a shadow on the ground. I know the Almighty is our only deliverance in war. The God of Providence is my protection. But even if I never return to you, I know that my Redeemer lives and has given me eternal life. Remember this, no matter
what happens. You are in my heart always. Miles.
Another providence was especially important for the civilian fleet of little ships. Given the time of year, waves in the Channel could cause especially dangerous conditions.
Initially, the destroyers only had rowboats, and the men would row in to the beaches of Dunkirk and then load up with troops and then have to row back out. Now, it's very physically taxing, and it was too inefficient.
Admiral Ramsay and Churchill appointed men to begin traveling around England and dragooning fishermen and yachtsmen and other people who own pleasure craft, civilian vessels, to join in the operation.
Because they were motorized, they were able to quickly go back and forth to shuttle troops from the beaches and from the moles to the larger ships.
They were asked by the government to bring their boat and help rescue the men. And most of the men who were asked to do that did exactly that. And they actually had to do that knowing that at this time of year, in the spring, that the waters between Britain and France are susceptible to instant and violent storms. These were men who made their living on the water, and they realized that if they launched out in their small vessels, that they might face weather that would destroy them before they would ever rescue a single soldier. During those 10 days, the waves were calm, and it was unusual, and nobody could remember when that had ever happened before. That's a providence that actually was noted by Churchill, Admiral Ramsay, and others, that it was unseasonably calm while this rescue operation took place. The channel that the ships had to follow to get back to the shore in England came under fire of German armor, who had taken those areas along the shoreline and set up their artillery to blast the ships out of the water, which they were able to do with some success. In some cases, a ship would be blown up and would burn and would create so much smoke that the other ships could use that smoke screen to get through. None of them really knew the magnitude of the success that they were having. I mean, they heard about the dive bombings on the beaches and the artillery raining down on them, the bodies floating in the water, the destroyers getting blown up, the minesweepers going to the bottom of the channel. They heard all that. So these civilians, these men that were called upon, at a moment in their life when they were most concerned about getting enough fish to feed their family, were asked to go launch into the channel into unknown weather and to help save stranded BEF soldiers on the beaches of Dunkirk. So these civilians had to place their faith in God that they could succeed at doing this. Some of them died, some of their ships were sunk, some snuck away. They went and made one load, and then they said, it's too likely that we're going to die in this operation, and they slipped away. After a few days, it was realized the only way, because the German Air Force now came back into action, the only way to make the rescue was at night. So the last few days of the Dunkirk operation were done in the dark, and of course that caused collisions too and other problems.
There were 3 routes the ships could take to reach Dunkirk. The shortest and most direct came under heavy enemy fire after the Calais surrender on the 27th of May. The alternative second route was twice as long and also under enemy fire, in this case from aircraft and U-boats. Taking this route meant fewer soldiers could be transported in a day's time. Given the dangers of using these 2 routes, a third was added. It was a shorter path, and sandbanks kept it partially protected from attack. In fact, the Germans did not seem to notice the use of this route at first. However, the sandbanks and minefields made it hard to navigate and meant this route had to be restricted to daytime. When the operation could only be done at night, the only routes left were the 2 which were most dangerous. For days on end, the Royal Navy transported soldiers around the clock, bravely lingering at Dunkirk in harm's way. The Germans continued to press inward toward Dunkirk on the heels of evacuating troops, and hard fighting continued. The French army remained at the front line, defending their country and allowing the BEF time to evacuate. The Belgian army to the north surrendered on the 28th of May, which suddenly created a gap in the British line. The soldiers on all sides became increasingly exhausted as the line drew closer and closer to Dunkirk. The discipline or lack thereof became evident under such circumstances. Thankfully, by the 30th of May, the evacuation was becoming more effective, with more transports and an increasingly strong leadership on site.
There were those on the firing line who realized that doing their duty and fighting to the last man, to the last cartridge, would save others. So there was a self-sacrificial sense, too, to the men in the firing line, that they were determined to stop the enemy so that the other men who had been selected to escape would be able to escape. As it turned out, providentially speaking, the men who fought to the last, most of them were evacuated as well. And eventually, the evacuation of the French took place alongside the British. In fact, that was one of the things that Churchill said to the French High Command, that he was going to save, that the British would save as much of the French army as they could. In fact, the last day of the operation, over 26,000 French soldiers were evacuated successfully to England. That great number of men who had the discipline and had the providential good fortune, if you will, of escaping the beaches, they're going to be the heart of the invasion of France in Normandy in just a few short years.
On the night of June the 2nd, the British rearguard departed for England. The evacuation of French forces continued until the end of Operation Dynamo on the 4th of June, when the remaining French rearguard surrendered. The consequences of defeat were real. Men died, resources were lost, countries had fallen.
The French army has been weakened. The Belgian army has been lost. A large part of those fortified lines upon which so much faith had been reposed is gone. Many valuable mining districts and factories have passed into the enemy's possession. The whole of the Channel ports are in his hands, with all the tragic consequences that follow from that. We must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory. Wars are not won by evacuations. But there was a victory inside this deliverance which should be noted.
In the British Army alone, over 65,000 men were lost, either dead, wounded, captured or missing. Some of the wounded could not be evacuated, and those who had been captured now faced 5 years as prisoners of war. Like so many in 1940, it could be hard for us to see good amid times of darkness when defeats appear final, and the enemy looms near. But even in the retreat to Dunkirk, God was providing for the redemption of not only the BEF, but for the outcome of the war itself, which had only just begun. And despite the sadness of losing so many lives, there was great rejoicing in England for those which had been rescued. In the providences of God, what Hitler considered at the time to be a great battle of annihilation has instead come to be remembered as a great rescue operation.
You look at the book of Job, and God pulls back the curtain a little bit so we can see what's happening from his perspective. And Job's friends are trying to explain God's ways to him. And Job is wondering, why are these things happening to me? And his friends think it's because he's committed some sin. And they don't know what God is doing. And Job is an obedient man, and he's been an obedient man throughout his life. And these troubles have come upon him. He doesn't know. Like I said, God pulled back the curtain to give us a glimpse into eternity. God had a totally different plan for Job. We look back as historians, and we're looking at Dunkirk and this great rescue operation that succeeded, and we see how it led to victory. That's another principle that we find in this whole episode. Dunkirk, in reality, is the beginning of the end of the Third Reich. While it's a defeat of the British Army and a great triumph of German might, German military might, it's actually the death knell of Germany. That invasion never comes. The invasion that they feared, the invasion that Churchill steeled their backbones to resist, never happened. God had ordained that the Germans would stop at the water's edge. They didn't have a way to get there. They didn't have the means to land in England, especially with 350,000 warriors still ready to fight and back in their camps and being retrained and refitted and being prepared for 3 more years to be brought back into the fight. Well, that's the big picture. So, I would say one of the great lessons for Christians is that you're called upon to do your duty where God has placed you, in the time in which He's placed you. And the results are part of the bigger picture that God is working. And we don't know what that is until we look back in time and we see what occurred, and we see how all of these different men doing the right thing at the right time, and people, casting their fortunes into the ocean, hoping that they will survive. Most of them did. Most of them did.
As the last ships returned to England, everyone looked ahead to coming months with uncertainty. Churchill reminded the people that the cost of victory was great and would be in the future as well. But he kept turning attention back to the task at hand with a prophecy of hope.
Sir, I have myself full confidence that if all do their duty, if nothing is neglected, and if the best arrangements are made, as they are being made, we shall prove ourselves once more able to defend our island home, to ride out the storm of war, and to outlive the menace of tyranny, if necessary for years, if necessary alone.
While they did not know it at the time, Hitler's future defeat was already certain. Emboldened by easy victories, he actually began sowing the seeds of his own destruction. In the book of Romans, after Paul reminds us that all things work together for good, he continues, "As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us."
No matter how dark the times we live in and the defeats that we see all around us, we are guaranteed a victory. More so than the Allies were in World War II, the church is guaranteed victory in the end. Christ has already subdued the enemy. Christians need to be faithful and have hope and be confident because God is in charge of history.
I will be ready.
We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old.
Now unto him that is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us, unto him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus throughout all ages, world without end. Amen. The story of Dunkirk is an interesting story because what it shows is you have these soldiers who could not save themselves. There was absolutely no way they could swim across the channel. They absolutely needed to be saved by their comrades. Their comrades had to come from England using boats to save them, so they were absolutely dependent on that. And in a way that's absolutely true for all of us. None of us can save ourselves. We cannot get ourselves to heaven. We cannot earn our way to heaven by doing good works. We cannot obey all of God's laws. So we need to be helped. We need that external help, and God has given that help. He has sent his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, into this world to be a saviour, to do all the things necessary for our salvation. He lived a perfect life. He died on the cross to pay the penalty for our sin. And if we put our trust in him, if we truly believe in Jesus Christ as God's Son, if we truly believe that God raised him from the dead and Jesus has ascended and is living in heaven, if we truly believe that, and if we truly have repented of our sin, then we will be rescued and we will be taken to heaven to live there for eternity.